When Jesus spoke those 3 words on the cross, "It is finished," he wasn't talking about his life ending. He was revealing the greatest spiritual secret ever given to humanity. Most people miss this completely. They think it was a statement of defeat, a final breath, a tragic ending. But Joel Goldsmith discovered what Jesus really meant, and when you understand this, your entire life transforms. What if I told you that every problem you're facing right now, every financial struggle, every health concern, every relationship conflict was already resolved 2,000 years ago? Not in some distant heaven, but in the eternal now of spiritual reality. This isn't religious doctrine. This is mystical truth that changes everything when you truly grasp it. Jesus wasn't saying his mission was complete. He was declaring that the entire human struggle, the illusion of separation from God, the belief in lack and limitation, was finished, done, completed. Not by his death, but by his realization. And that same realization is available to you right now, in this very moment. Here's what Joel Goldsmith taught about these words. In spiritual consciousness, there is no healing to be done because there is no actual disease. There is no supply to demonstrate because infinite abundance already exists. There is no relationship to fix because love is already whole. Everything you think you need to achieve, acquire, or become has already been accomplished in divine reality. The reason your prayers seem unanswered isn't because God isn't listening. It's because you're asking for something that already exists. Imagine standing in a river, dying of thirst, begging God for water. The water is already there. You don't need more water. You need to recognize the water surrounding you. This is what "it is finished" means in practical terms. Most spiritual teaching tells you to work harder, pray longer, visualize better, raise your vibration. But Goldsmith discovered that all spiritual work is actually letting go of the belief that work needs to be done. The finished kingdom is already here. Your job isn't to create it. Your job is to recognize it. This recognition is what transforms everything. Let me show you how this works in daily life. When you face a financial emergency, your natural response is panic, followed by desperate prayer. You ask God to send money, to open doors, to provide miraculously. But if it is finished, then the supply already exists in consciousness. Your work isn't begging or manifesting. Your work is resting in the truth that divine abundance is already established. This doesn't mean sitting passively while bills pile up. It means taking inspired action from a consciousness of completeness rather than lack. When you know it is finished, you move through the world differently. You make phone calls from peace, not desperation. You seek solutions from wisdom, not fear. The external actions may look similar, but the consciousness behind them changes everything. Joel Goldsmith healed thousands of people using this principle. When someone came to him with cancer, he didn't see cancer to heal. He saw the finished spiritual perfection that was always true. His recognition of completeness allowed their consciousness to shift. Not always instantly, sometimes gradually over weeks, but the transformation came from recognizing what was already finished. The technique is deceptively simple, which is why most people miss it. When a problem appears, your first response should be silence. Not prayer for change, but recognition of truth. Sit quietly and acknowledge. In spiritual reality, this is already finished. God's work is complete. What appears as a problem is only my limited perception of something already resolved in divine consciousness. You don't need to feel this truth emotionally at first. You simply need to acknowledge it mentally, repeatedly, until your consciousness shifts. It might take 5 minutes or 5 weeks. The timeline doesn't matter because in spiritual reality, time doesn't exist. What exists is the eternal finished nature of God's creation, which includes you, your body, your relationships, your supply. This isn't positive thinking or affirmation work. This is recognition of what is already spiritually true. When you stop trying to make something happen and start recognizing what has already happened in consciousness, you align with divine reality. That alignment is what we call healing, prosperity, harmony. But these aren't achievements. They're recognitions of the finished kingdom that was always here. Sarah was a single mother facing eviction with 3 children and $72 in her bank account. She had prayed desperately for weeks, cried herself to sleep, applied for every assistance program available. Nothing changed. Then she encountered Joel Goldsmith's teaching on "It is finished." At first, she thought it was cruel spiritual bypass. How could her crisis already be resolved when the eviction notice was real? But something in the teaching resonated. She began practicing recognition instead of petition. Every morning for 2 weeks, she sat in silence, acknowledging that in spiritual reality, her supply was already complete. She didn't feel peaceful immediately. She didn't see money appear. But slowly, her consciousness shifted from panic to quiet certainty. She still took action, still applied for jobs, still made calls. In the 3rd week, a former colleague called about a job she hadn't applied for. The timing was perfect, the salary exactly what she needed. Was this coincidence? Perhaps. But Sarah noticed that the opportunity came only after her consciousness shifted from desperately seeking to quietly knowing. The external provision matched her internal recognition that it was already finished. Marcus struggled with chronic pain for 8 years after a car accident. Multiple surgeries provided temporary relief but never lasting healing. He tried every spiritual technique, positive affirmations, energy healing, meditation retreats. Some things helped briefly, but the pain always returned. When he learned about recognizing completion instead of seeking healing, he felt skeptical but desperate enough to try anything. For 6 weeks, Marcus practiced resting in the truth that in God's reality, his body was already perfect and whole. He didn't deny the pain or pretend it wasn't there. He acknowledged it as a limited perception of something already resolved spiritually. He continued physical therapy and proper medical care, but his inner work shifted from fighting pain to recognizing perfection. The change wasn't dramatic or instant. Around week 7, he realized he'd gone 2 days without thinking about the pain. By week 12, the intensity had decreased by 60%. 6 months later, the chronic pain was gone. His doctors couldn't explain it medically, but Marcus understood. When his consciousness recognized the finished work, his physical experience aligned with that recognition gradually over time. Jennifer and Robert's marriage was ending after 19 years. The resentment was deep, communication had completely broken down, and divorce papers were being prepared. Neither wanted this outcome, but both felt powerless to change the toxic dynamic. A friend gave Jennifer a Joel Goldsmith book about recognizing spiritual wholeness in relationships. She began practicing alone. Every time anger arose toward Robert, she paused and silently recognized, in spiritual truth, love is already complete between us. This isn't wishful thinking. This is recognition of divine reality. She didn't tell Robert what she was doing. She just shifted her own consciousness from seeing a broken marriage to recognizing the finished nature of love itself. Nothing changed for 3 weeks. Then Robert noticed something different about Jennifer, though he couldn't identify what. The atmosphere between them softened slightly. They began having actual conversations instead of arguments. It took 7 months of Jennifer's consistent practice before Robert asked what had changed in her. They didn't have a fairy tale reconciliation, but they rebuilt their marriage on a foundation of recognizing spiritual completeness rather than trying to fix human brokenness. These stories aren't exceptional miracles. They're natural results of aligning consciousness with spiritual truth. Joel Goldsmith worked with thousands of students who experienced similar transformations. Some changes happened quickly, others gradually over months. But the principle remained consistent. When you stop trying to make something happen and start recognizing what is already finished in divine consciousness, your experience shifts. The key difference between this approach and typical manifestation teaching is the foundation. You're not trying to create, attract, or manifest something new. You're recognizing something eternally present. This removes the strain, the desperation, the feeling that you must do more to be worthy of receiving. It is already finished. Your worthiness was established before you were born. This doesn't mean you become passive or stop taking action. It means your actions come from recognition rather than lack, from certainty rather than hope, from knowing rather than seeking. This shift in consciousness is subtle, but profoundly powerful. It's the difference between swimming desperately toward shore and realizing you're already standing on solid ground. If these transformation stories inspire you, like this video to help others find these teachings, subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith wisdom, and comment. Which story resonated most deeply with your current situation? Now let me give you 3 specific practices that deepen your recognition of the finished kingdom. The first is what Goldsmith called the practice of the presence. This means training yourself to acknowledge God's complete presence in every moment, especially when problems appear. Not God who will help you, but God whose perfect work is already established right where the problem seems to be. When you wake up anxious about your day, pause before getting out of bed. Spend 60 seconds in silent recognition. God's presence is here now, complete and perfect. Whatever this day holds is already resolved in divine consciousness. I'm not entering a day of problems to solve. I'm entering a day of recognizing the finished kingdom. This isn't prayer for help. This is acknowledgement of present spiritual reality. Throughout your day, whenever tension arises, return to this recognition. In a difficult meeting, silently acknowledge, God's perfect harmony is already present here. In a financial crisis, recognize, divine supply is already complete in this situation. You're not creating these realities. You're recognizing them. This practice trains your consciousness to default to spiritual truth rather than material appearance. The second technique is what Goldsmith called resting in the Word. When you read or hear a spiritual truth that resonates deeply, don't just acknowledge it intellectually and move on. Rest in it. Let it saturate your consciousness. If the statement, "It is finished," strikes you as profound, spend time just sitting with those words, not analyzing them, not trying to make them work, just resting in their truth. This is completely different from affirmation work. You're not repeating words to make something happen. You're allowing a spiritual truth to reveal its own meaning to your consciousness. Sometimes this takes 5 minutes, sometimes an hour. Joel Goldsmith would often spend entire sessions just resting in a single statement of truth, letting it unfold its deeper meaning. You might rest in "It is finished" for days or weeks, returning to it again and again. Each time, the meaning deepens. First, you understand it intellectually. Then you begin to feel it emotionally. Eventually, it becomes your consciousness, the lens through which you perceive all of life. This is when transformation becomes natural and consistent rather than occasional and unpredictable. The third practice is recognizing spiritual identity. Most of your problems exist because you identify as a limited human being who needs things, lacks things, struggles with things. But in spiritual reality, your identity is already complete as the expression of divine consciousness. You're not a person trying to reach God. You're God's finished expression, mistakenly believing you're separate and limited. When a health issue arises, your typical response is, "I have a sick body that needs healing." But the recognition of spiritual identity shifts this to, "I am the perfect expression of divine life. What appears as sickness is a misperception of my already established spiritual wholeness." This isn't denial of symptoms. This is recognition of deeper truth underneath appearances. Practice this identity recognition throughout your day. Instead of "I need more money," recognize, "I am the expression of infinite divine supply." Instead of "I need healing," recognize, "I am the manifestation of perfect spiritual wholeness." These aren't affirmations to make something happen. They're recognitions of what is already eternally true in consciousness. Your experience gradually aligns with your recognized identity. These 3 practices work together to deepen your consciousness of completion. The practice of the presence keeps you anchored in spiritual reality moment by moment. Resting in the Word allows spiritual truth to transform your understanding. Recognizing spiritual identity shifts your fundamental sense of who you are from limited human to complete divine expression. Joel Goldsmith emphasized that these aren't techniques to get something you lack. They're practices to recognize what you already are and have in spiritual consciousness. The more you practice, the more natural this recognition becomes. Eventually, you don't have to consciously practice because your default consciousness is recognition of the finished kingdom. This transition takes time for most people. Don't expect instant mastery. Joel himself practiced for years before this consciousness became natural and consistent. But even in the early stages, you'll notice shifts. Problems that once devastated you become minor inconveniences. Lack that once terrified you becomes temporary appearance. The finished kingdom starts revealing itself in your daily experience. Let's address the biggest obstacle most people face with this teaching. When you're in genuine crisis, when the pain is real, when the bank account is actually empty, recognizing it is finished can feel like spiritual bypass. You might think, this is just denial. I'm ignoring reality. I'm pretending problems don't exist. This resistance is completely normal and actually healthy. Here's what Joel Goldsmith taught about this challenge. You're not denying the appearance. You're not pretending the problem doesn't exist on the human level. You're recognizing that beneath the appearance is a spiritual reality that is already complete. Both levels exist simultaneously. The appearance is what you see with human eyes. The reality is what exists in divine consciousness. The mistake most people make is trying to jump directly from seeing the problem to feeling complete peace about it. That's not how consciousness shifts. First, you acknowledge the appearance honestly. Yes, the bank account is empty. Yes, the pain is real. Yes, the relationship is broken. Then, underneath that acknowledgement, you begin recognizing, and yet in spiritual consciousness, this is already resolved. Both truths coexist until consciousness fully shifts. The second major challenge is impatience. You practice recognition for 3 days, and when nothing changes externally, you conclude it doesn't work. This is where most people abandon the teaching right before breakthrough would occur. Joel Goldsmith was very clear about this. Consciousness shift takes time, sometimes days, sometimes weeks, occasionally months, for deeply ingrained patterns. Think of it this way. You've spent years, maybe decades, building a consciousness of lack, fear, and limitation. That consciousness didn't form overnight, and it won't dissolve overnight. Every time you practice recognition of completion, you're dissolving old patterns and establishing new consciousness. This is gradual work, like strengthening a muscle or learning a language. The key is consistency without attachment to timeline. Practice recognition not because you expect results tomorrow, but because it's the truth regardless of appearances. Some of Goldsmith's students experienced rapid shifts. Others practiced for months before seeing external changes. But every single person who persisted eventually experienced transformation, because consciousness shift always produces corresponding experience. The third challenge is what Goldsmith called taking back the problem. You practice recognition, feel peaceful, maybe even experience some improvement. Then something triggers the old fear and you immediately forget everything you've learned. You're back in panic mode, desperately praying for help, completely forgetting that it is finished. This cycle frustrates people enormously. Joel taught that this is part of the process, not a sign of failure. Old consciousness patterns don't dissolve linearly. They release in layers. You might have genuine recognition of completion, then face a new trigger that brings back old fear. This doesn't mean you've lost your progress. It means another layer is ready to be released. Each time you return to recognition after forgetting, you deepen the new consciousness. The practice here is gentle persistence without self-judgment. When you catch yourself back in fear and striving, don't condemn yourself. Simply recognize, I forgot. Now I remember. It is finished. The issue isn't how many times you forget. The issue is how consistently you return to recognition. Over time, the periods of remembering grow longer and the periods of forgetting grow shorter. The fourth challenge is spiritual isolation. You practice this teaching and start experiencing shifts, but everyone around you still operates from lack consciousness. Your family thinks you're being irresponsible when you remain calm during crisis. Your friends worry you're in denial. Your logical mind questions if you're delusional. This external pressure can shake your conviction. Goldsmith experienced this himself. When he first began practicing recognition of spiritual completeness, people thought he was avoiding reality. Some called him irresponsible. Others said he was in spiritual bypass. But he persisted because he was experiencing results, even when others couldn't understand his approach. He built a community of practitioners who supported each other in this consciousness. You might need to practice quietly without explaining to others what you're doing. Not everyone is ready to understand that all spiritual work is recognition rather than achievement. Find others who practice this consciousness, even if only through books or online communities. Joel Goldsmith's recordings and writings create a consciousness that supports your practice. You're not alone in this, even when it feels that way. If these challenge-breaking techniques speak to your heart, like to support this content, subscribe for advanced spiritual practices, and comment. Which obstacle are you ready to transform now? Let me show you how this works in extremely difficult situations. Michael was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and given 3 months to live. He'd been a devoted spiritual student for years, practiced meditation daily, lived consciously. When the diagnosis came, his first response was feeling betrayed. Why wasn't his spiritual practice protecting him? This is the crisis that tests everything you believe. Michael spent 2 weeks in despair before remembering Goldsmith's teaching on completion. He realized he'd been practicing spirituality as insurance against bad things happening. But "it is finished" meant something different. It meant that even in this diagnosis, spiritual perfection was already present. Not that the cancer wasn't real, but that underneath the appearance was unshakable divine wholeness. He began practicing recognition of spiritual completeness while still receiving medical treatment. He wasn't choosing between medicine and spirit. He was recognizing spiritual truth while taking practical human action. For 8 weeks, nothing changed externally. The cancer progressed as predicted. Then, almost imperceptibly, something shifted. His pain decreased. His energy returned slightly. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. Michael's story didn't end with instant miraculous healing. It unfolded over 18 months of consistent recognition practice combined with medical care. The cancer went into remission, returned partially, then finally disappeared completely. His doctors called it unexplained spontaneous remission, but Michael understood. His consciousness had shifted from seeing himself as a person with cancer to recognizing his spiritual identity as the perfect expression of divine life. What's most remarkable isn't that the cancer disappeared. It's how Michael lived during those 18 months. He experienced profound peace even when scan results were discouraging. He maintained deep certainty even when symptoms worsened temporarily. His family and friends witnessed someone facing death with inexplicable calm. This peace wasn't denial or resignation. It was the natural result of consciousness anchored in completion. Joel Goldsmith taught that healing isn't really about fixing bodies. It's about consciousness recognizing its own spiritual nature. When that recognition is genuine and sustained, physical healing often follows, but not always instantly and not always in expected ways. The real healing is freedom from fear, which is possible regardless of physical circumstances. Michael discovered this truth through his most difficult trial. Rebecca's business was failing catastrophically. She'd invested everything and was facing bankruptcy that would destroy her financially for years. She'd built this company with pure intention, wanting to serve people and create something meaningful. The failure felt like cosmic punishment. How could she have been so wrong? This is where spiritual teaching meets brutal practical reality. She discovered Goldsmith's work through a friend during her darkest week. The teaching on "it is finished" initially angered her. How dare someone suggest her crisis was already resolved when she was losing everything? But desperation makes you willing to try anything. She began practicing recognition, not because she believed it, but because she had no other options left. For the first month, nothing external changed. The business continued declining. But something subtle shifted internally. Rebecca found herself making clearer decisions from calm rather than panic. She negotiated better terms with creditors. She identified which parts of the business to save and which to release. The ultimate outcome wasn't what she originally wanted. The business did close, but she preserved enough to start fresh without complete devastation. What Rebecca discovered through this process transformed her understanding of completion. "It is finished" didn't mean her business would be saved as she wanted. It meant that in divine consciousness, her true purpose and supply were already established. The business closing was actually part of recognizing completion, not a failure of the principle. Sometimes completion looks like endings, so new beginnings can emerge. 2 years later, Rebecca built a different business aligned more authentically with her gifts. She credits the first business failure as necessary for discovering her true work. But more importantly, she learned that recognizing completion doesn't mean controlling outcomes. It means trusting that whatever unfolds is part of divine perfection, even when it doesn't match your human preferences. This is advanced understanding of Goldsmith's teaching. Completion doesn't mean getting what you want. It means recognizing that divine wisdom is already at work in your life, including through apparent failures and disappointments. When you truly rest in "it is finished," you develop the capacity to see perfection even in unwanted circumstances. This is genuine spiritual maturity, not beginner's magical thinking about manifesting desires. After months or years of practicing recognition of completion, something profound shifts in your consciousness. You stop dividing life into problems and solutions. You stop seeing yourself as someone who needs fixing. You start experiencing life as the continual unfolding of something already complete. This isn't a belief you hold, it's the consciousness you live from. Everything changes from this foundation. You still face challenges, but they don't devastate you. You still experience loss, but it doesn't destroy you. You still encounter difficult people and situations, but they don't control your inner state. Why? Because your identity is no longer tied to circumstances. You know yourself as the finished expression of divine consciousness, and that knowing remains stable regardless of what happens externally. Joel Goldsmith lived from this consciousness for decades. People who knew him described a quality of peace that wasn't dependent on anything, not because his life was perfect or problem-free, but because his consciousness was anchored in spiritual completion. This is available to you, not as a distant goal, but as a present reality you're learning to recognize more consistently. The practical transformation shows up in unexpected ways. You notice you're not obsessively checking your bank balance anymore, not because you suddenly have unlimited wealth, but because your consciousness isn't attached to the numbers. You find yourself in difficult conversations without the old defensive reactions, not because you've learned better communication skills, but because you're not protecting a vulnerable, limited self anymore. Your health becomes more stable. You sleep better. You feel more energy. Not because you're doing special wellness practices, but because anxiety isn't depleting your system constantly. Your relationships improve, even difficult ones. Not because people change, but because you're no longer approaching relationships from need and incompleteness. You have nothing to get from others when you know you're already complete. These changes happen gradually, almost imperceptibly. One day you realize you haven't worried about money in weeks. Another day you notice chronic pain that plagued you for years has quietly disappeared. You find yourself laughing more easily, feeling lighter, experiencing spontaneous joy. These aren't achievements you worked for. They're natural expressions of consciousness recognizing its own completion. Here's what most spiritual teachings won't tell you. Even after years of practice, you'll still have moments of forgetting. You'll still face situations that trigger old fear patterns. You'll still catch yourself striving and seeking instead of recognizing. But these moments become less frequent and less intense. More importantly, you recover faster. You don't spend days or weeks lost in fear before remembering truth. This is the realistic picture of spiritual transformation, not perfection, but progress. Not constant bliss, but increasing peace. Not immunity to challenge, but capacity to remain centered through challenge. Joel Goldsmith never claimed to be beyond human experience. He simply developed the consciousness to recognize spiritual completion more consistently than most people. You're developing the same consciousness. Every time you practice recognition instead of petition, every time you rest in completion instead of striving for achievement, every time you identify as spiritual wholeness instead of limited human, you're building this consciousness. It becomes your natural state gradually, through consistent practice over time. When Jesus said, "It is finished," he was speaking to you across 2,000 years. He was telling you that the spiritual work is already complete. You don't need to become worthy, achieve enlightenment, or earn God's love. You already are the finished expression of divine perfection. Your only work is recognizing this truth consistently enough that your human experience aligns with spiritual reality. This recognition transforms everything. Not because it changes external circumstances, though it often does, but because it changes you. You become someone who lives from completion instead of lack, from certainty instead of fear, from knowing instead of seeking. This is the greatest transformation possible in human consciousness. Joel Goldsmith spent his life helping people discover this truth, not as distant spiritual theory, but as practical daily reality. The same transformation he experienced and facilitated in thousands of others is available to you right now. Not tomorrow, not after more spiritual work, but now. Because it is finished. It always has been. You're simply learning to recognize what was always true. If your spiritual understanding expanded through these Joel Goldsmith secrets, like this video, subscribe for more transformative teachings, and comment, "I am transformed," to confirm your new path.
When the heart begins to perceive the reason the Master called God Father, an inner shift occurs so profound that words can scarcely hold it. For in that moment, the soul awakens to its own lineage, not as a creation separated from its source, but as the offspring of infinite spirit itself. This realization is not a belief nor a hope, but an experience, a still, radiant awareness that within you, life is not borrowed but shared with the eternal. The mind that once sought God outside begins to rest in quiet recognition that the presence you have named as God is the very essence of your own being. When you say Father, and mean it with understanding, you are not addressing a distant deity. You are communing with the living source that breathes you, moves you, sustains you. You are acknowledging relationship, but not of body to body or mind to mind, rather of spirit to spirit, and in that communion all sense of isolation fades away. Fear dissolves because you cannot be apart from what you are. The soul stands in the light of its inheritance and knows, I and my source are one. As this truth ripens within, prayer changes. It ceases to be petition and becomes communion. It is no longer the cry of a child asking for gifts, but the quiet listening of one who already lives in divine abundance. The Father does not need to be persuaded, he needs only to be recognized. And in that recognition, the infinite flow of love, wisdom, and power becomes visible in every detail of living. The world outside still moves through its shadows and noise, but within there is peace, a peace that is not dependent on circumstance, for it flows from understanding. You begin to see others not as strangers, not as competitors, but as fellow heirs of the same divine life. Compassion arises naturally, and joy too, for love knows no lack. To understand why the Master used that sacred word is to awaken to the timeless relationship between Creator and creation, spirit breathing spirit. When this dawns in you, you no longer seek to reach God, for you find that you have never been apart. You live in the Father, and the Father lives in you, and in that realization, life becomes prayer, and every breath becomes grace. Oneness with the divine source. True understanding reveals that we are not separate from God. The word Father signifies our unity with the infinite Spirit that lives through us. Communion, not petition. Prayer transforms from asking for blessings to silently communing with the divine presence already within. Recognition replaces request. End of separation and fear. When we realize our divine inheritance, fear and loneliness dissolve, for we can never be apart from our source. Inner peace and compassion, living in awareness of divine sonship, brings unshakable peace and spontaneous love toward all beings, seeing them as fellow heirs of spirit. Life as continuous grace. Once the truth is realized, every act, breath, and moment becomes sacred. Life itself becomes a living prayer flowing from divine harmony. To awaken to the realization that you are one with the divine source is to step beyond the boundaries of human belief and enter the vastness of spiritual awareness. It is not a thought that comes and goes, nor an idea learned through study. It is a living revelation that dawns quietly within the soul, often when the mind has grown weary of searching outward. When the Master spoke of God as Father, he was pointing to this very truth, that life itself is not something granted to us by an external power, but something of which we are an inseparable expression. The breath that animates you is the same life that sustains the stars. The consciousness through which you perceive existence is not yours alone. It is the universal mind appearing as you. This understanding cannot be confined to theology or tradition, for it transcends doctrine. It is the recognition that the infinite is individualized as your very being. When you say Father with awareness, you are acknowledging that your existence has never been apart from the divine whole. The wave does not plead to the ocean to make it wet. It already carries the essence of the sea within itself. In the same way, you need not strive to become spiritual. You are spirit manifest, though hidden under layers of human conditioning. As this truth begins to unfold within, the mind's old patterns of dependence and fear start to dissolve. You no longer approach life as one who must earn divine favor, for you realize that favor is not bestowed, it is inherent. The Father's love is not something to be sought, but something to be recognized. Like the sun that shines, whether you face it or turn away, the soul, in its awakening, turns toward that inner light and finds that it was never truly lost, only unaware. When you live from this awareness, the sense of limitation begins to fade. You no longer see yourself as a fragile body or a restless mind, but as a living transparency through which divine life expresses itself. Every thought of separation, every fear of lack, every shadow of guilt loses its grip because you know there is only one life, one mind, one spirit, and it is expressing as you, through you, around you. This is not arrogance, but humility of the highest kind, for it recognizes that there is no personal self apart from the infinite. It is the humility of knowing that all good flows from the source, and that you are its vessel. In this awareness, life takes on new meaning. Ordinary acts, speaking, walking, working, become sacred movements of divine expression. You begin to see beauty where once there was monotony, peace where once there was turmoil, and love where once there was indifference. Relationships are no longer rooted in need or expectation, but in recognition of the same divine essence in others. You realize that to honor the Father within yourself is also to honor Him in every soul you meet. Judgment softens, compassion deepens, and gratitude becomes the silent song of your being. The great mystery is that this understanding does not come by effort, but by surrender. You cannot force yourself into oneness. You can only become still enough to perceive it. When the restless mind yields to the quiet of spirit, the truth reveals itself, not as something gained, but as something remembered. It was there all along, waiting to be known. And once known, it changes the very fabric of your consciousness. You cease to live for God and begin to live from God. The divine becomes not a distant power you invoke, but the very presence you embody. To understand your oneness with the divine source is to live without boundaries, to rest in the awareness that all that God is, you are in expression. You no longer reach upward for heaven is the consciousness in which you dwell. The Father's life is your life, His mind your mind, His love your love, and in this realization you find the peace that has no opposite, the freedom that no world can give, and the joy that is eternal. When prayer ceases to be a petition and becomes communion, a sacred transformation occurs within the soul. It is as though the heart learns a new language, the language of silence, trust, and inner knowing. For so long, humanity has approached the divine as a distant ruler, one who must be persuaded to act, convinced to bless, or reminded to care. But when understanding awakens, that old relationship dissolves, and in its place arises the quiet certainty that the presence you seek has never been absent. Prayer, then, becomes not an effort to reach out, but an allowing, a resting in what already is. True communion is not spoken with words, nor does it depend on form. It is the stillness between thoughts, where spirit meets spirit. It is the listening heart that recognizes the infinite already whispering within. To commune with the divine is to become aware of its activity in every breath, in every unfolding moment. You no longer stand as a beggar before a throne, but as a beloved child in the presence of an ever-flowing love. You realize that the Father knows your needs before you speak them, and in that realization, the need itself begins to fade, for you sense that the fullness of life is already yours. This change in prayer is not born of will, but of realization. It dawns when you begin to see that the divine does not withhold. God does not respond because of your words, rather, your awareness responds to God's ever-present activity. As the wave does not call to the ocean to give it movement, so too you do not call upon Spirit to make your life whole. The life of Spirit already animates you. What is required is not asking but recognition. When you enter that place of quiet communion, you are not asking for light. You are remembering that you are in the light, that the light has never left you. In this communion, the mind becomes still, the heart softens, and the struggle to be heard gives way to the joy of listening. Every prayer uttered from fear transforms into a silent resting in love. The frantic desire to change outer circumstances yields to the inner knowing that divine harmony is already unfolding. You begin to see that prayer is not a request for something to happen, but an alignment with what eternally is. The true miracle of prayer is not that it changes God's will, but that it changes your awareness to perceive God's will already operating as perfection. As this awareness deepens, even the simplest moments become prayer. The quiet walk, the gentle breath, the act of kindness all become expressions of communion. You discover that prayer is not limited to words or ritual, but is the very rhythm of living in oneness with the Source. There is no longer a division between the sacred and the ordinary. All life becomes holy ground because you see God in all. The conversation between you and the divine is constant, effortless, and wordless, a flow of consciousness that requires no sound to be heard. And yet, this communion is not passive. It is alive, creative, and transformative. In it, you find guidance without asking, strength without striving, peace without searching. It is as though the Father within breathes through you, lives through you, and reveals through you the boundless goodness of divine life. You become aware that every situation, every encounter, every breath is an opportunity to listen and to behold the movement of Spirit. No longer are you praying for healing, you are realizing the presence of wholeness. No longer are you pleading for supply, you are awakening to the abundance that flows from infinite source. To commune, rather than to petition, is to live from the awareness that you already dwell in the heart of the divine. The outer words may fall away, but the inner awareness remains. You walk through life in a silent conversation with the infinite, not asking, not demanding, but knowing. It is the stillness that listens rather than speaks, the peace that receives rather than strives, the love that recognizes rather than reaches. And in that quiet recognition, you discover that prayer is not a moment in time. It is the eternal state of being one with God. When the soul awakens to its divine inheritance, when it truly perceives that it has never been apart from its source, a profound transformation takes place within. The fears that once haunted the human mind, fear of loss, fear of death, fear of lack, begin to lose their substance, for they were born only from the illusion of separation. To believe oneself apart from God is to live in the shadow of insecurity, always reaching outward to grasp what seems missing. But when the veil lifts and you see that the life you live is the very life of the infinite expressing as you, the shadows dissolve in the light of truth. The heart no longer trembles before the unknown, because it knows that the unknown is but another name for the Father's presence. This realization is not born from effort or intellect, but from inner stillness. It is the quiet dawning of awareness that comes when one no longer strives to possess God, but allows God to reveal himself as the essence of one's being. The moment you perceive that your breath, your consciousness, your very existence are not separate from the divine flow of life, fear becomes impossible. For how can one fear when the eternal life of spirit is the substance of one's own existence? Death loses its sting because you understand that the self, which is spirit, cannot perish. Lack loses its power because you know that the source of all abundance lives within. Loneliness disappears because the divine presence fills the temple of your being and extends beyond all form. When you rest in this awareness, life takes on a quiet assurance. The mind ceases its endless questioning, will I be safe? Will I have enough? Will I be loved? For it has found the answer already within. You begin to realize that all fear springs from the belief in two powers, one of good and another of evil, one of life and another of death. But in the consciousness of oneness, there is only one power, one life, one love, expressing in infinite ways. The heart no longer struggles to control the outer world, for it knows that harmony is not achieved by force, but revealed through surrender to divine order. In this state, even the storms of life are met with serenity. You no longer seek to escape them, for you understand that the same presence which lives in peace also lives in the storm. You learn to walk through the turbulence of human experience with a calm born not of denial but of recognition that there is nothing outside of God's infinite presence. Fear was never real power, it was the shadow cast by forgetting who you are. And when memory returns, when spirit whispers, "You are mine, and I am yours," the shadow fades as effortlessly as night before dawn. This awakening brings a freedom the world cannot give. It is not freedom from circumstances, but freedom from bondage to them. It is the realization that nothing external can touch the essence of your being. Even in the midst of worldly challenge, there is a center of stillness within you, untouched by time, unshaken by events. That center is the Father's life as your life. To dwell there is to live without fear, to meet the world from the consciousness of divine assurance. You begin to act, speak, and move not from anxiety but from quiet confidence that every step unfolds within the rhythm of divine harmony. As this awareness grows, compassion naturally arises, for you see that every soul's fear comes from forgetting this same truth. You no longer judge, for you know the pain of separation and the joy of reunion. And so you extend understanding rather than criticism, light rather than shadow. The fear that once bound you becomes a doorway through which love flows freely. To live without separation is to live without fear, for there is nothing left to defend, nothing left to lose, and everything left to give. When awareness deepens into the realization of divine sonship, the heart becomes the dwelling place of peace and compassion. No longer does one see life through the narrow lens of self-interest, for the sense of a separate self dissolves in the recognition that all beings share one life, one source, one spirit. The walls that once divided me from you quietly fall away, and in their place arises a tenderness that does not need to be taught. You begin to see the divine presence shining through every face, every form, every circumstance. What once appeared ordinary now carries the fragrance of the sacred, for love has opened the inner eye to behold truth everywhere. In the consciousness of oneness, peace ceases to be something pursued, it becomes the natural condition of being. It is not a peace born from the absence of conflict, but from the awareness that all conflict arises only from misperception. When the mind no longer judges, when it no longer insists that things be other than they are, a stillness unfolds. That stillness is not passive, it is vibrant and alive. It flows through every moment like an invisible rhythm, guiding each thought, word, and action. You begin to live from that center of peace, not because the outer world has changed, but because your vision has. You recognize that harmony is not something to be created, but something to be revealed through surrender to divine presence. Compassion, too, blossoms naturally in this awareness. It does not come from pity or moral obligation, but from the clear recognition that the life within you is the same life within all. When you encounter suffering, you do not stand apart as an observer. You feel it as your own, and yet remain untouched by despair. Love moves you to act, to comfort, to uplift, but without attachment to outcome. Compassion born of spirit is not sentimental, it is strength disguised as gentleness. It does not seek to fix the world, but to behold the divine perfection within it, knowing that every being is on a sacred journey toward remembrance. In such a state, relationships are transformed. You no longer relate to others through desire or need, but through the silent acknowledgement of shared divinity. The urge to control, to dominate, to be right fades away, replaced by the quiet joy of understanding. You listen differently. You listen with the heart, not to reply but to perceive. Every encounter becomes an opportunity for love to know itself. The harsh word loses its sting, the unkind act its power, because you see beyond appearances to the divine essence that has momentarily forgotten itself. You realize that forgiveness is not something you give. It is the natural radiance of love that holds no memory of offense. The peace that arises from this awareness is unshakable because it is not dependent on outer conditions. Even in the midst of chaos, the soul remains anchored in serenity, knowing that all movement, all change, all unfolding is guided by divine intelligence. You may walk through storms, but the storm does not enter you. You may witness pain, but pain does not define you. Inwardly, there is a spaciousness, an eternal stillness, where the Father's presence abides. It is there that compassion flows freely, like a river from a hidden spring, quiet, constant, nourishing everything it touches. As this consciousness grows, the world no longer appears as a battlefield of competing wills, but as a vast field of divine expression. You begin to see that peace and compassion are not qualities to cultivate, but to uncover. They are the fragrance of the soul when it is free from the illusion of separation. In this state, you do not merely talk about love, you live it effortlessly, wordlessly, and in your silent presence others begin to feel it too, for peace is contagious and compassion multiplies wherever it is truly seen. When the soul awakens to the realization that life itself is an unbroken expression of divine grace, existence ceases to feel like a series of struggles and becomes a continuous unfolding of harmony. Every breath, every movement, every encounter becomes part of a sacred rhythm flowing from the infinite. The mind, once restless and striving, begins to rest in the awareness that there is nothing to gain, nothing to fear, and nothing to lose. The Father's presence fills every moment so completely that even the simplest act, a glance, a word, a step, becomes illuminated with purpose. This is not the doing of the human self, but the effortless expression of the divine living through its own creation. When one lives in this awareness, gratitude ceases to be a practice and becomes the atmosphere of being. You no longer need to count your blessings, for you perceive that life itself is the blessing. You do not thank God for specific gifts, you live in the state of thanksgiving because you see that every experience, even those wrapped in difficulty, carries the seed of revelation. Grace is not something added to life. It is the substance of life. It is the invisible current guiding every event, drawing all things toward the realization of unity. Even what appears as loss is but the hand of love reshaping form so that deeper truth may emerge. As understanding deepens, effort gives way to effortless expression. You stop trying to make life spiritual and begin to see that life has never been otherwise. Every breath you take, every thought that rises is part of a divine unfolding. Work becomes worship, not because of religious intention, but because the presence is felt in every action. The most ordinary tasks, washing, walking, speaking, become sacraments, outward reflections of inward stillness. You move through the world as one who sees from within, aware that every moment is the meeting place of heaven and earth. Nothing is separate, nothing profane. The sacred has woven itself into the very fabric of being, and all you need to do is be present to it. In this consciousness, life no longer alternates between sacred and secular, joy and sorrow, success and failure. It becomes one continuous flow of divine activity. When something appears to go wrong, you no longer resist or condemn it. Instead, you watch with the quiet assurance that grace is at work, even in what the human mind calls disorder. You realize that the divine never withdraws, it only changes form. What was once seen as interruption is now recognized as invitation, an opportunity to perceive God's movement in a new way. This is the mystery of living in grace, that nothing can truly oppose you, for all things serve your awakening. There comes a moment when you stop seeking signs of God and begin to see God as the very essence of seeing itself. The eyes through which you look, the heart through which you feel, the breath through which you live, all are instruments through which the infinite expresses its own being. You realize that you are not living life. Life is living you. The current of divine energy moves through your awareness, carrying you gently yet powerfully into the perfect unfolding of each moment. And as you yield to it, struggle dissolves. The river of grace carries you effortlessly, not because you have learned to swim, but because you have ceased to resist. Living in this awareness, you find that joy arises without cause. It is not the joy of circumstance, but the joy of being itself, calm, radiant, boundless. The soul becomes like a clear mirror, reflecting the light of the divine in every direction. Wherever you are, whatever you do, the presence shines. Life becomes prayer without words, worship without ritual, thanksgiving without effort. And in that sacred stillness, you understand at last that grace has never been given or withdrawn. It has only waited to be seen. When the soul awakens to the living truth of the Father within, all seeking ends and fulfillment begins. You no longer wander in search of light, for you have discovered that the light was shining within you all along. Life becomes a quiet unfolding of divine presence, each moment an expression of love, each breath a revelation of unity. The veil of separation lifts, and you behold that the same Spirit that lived in the Master lives in you, speaks through you, and walks the earth as you. There is no longer a distance between heaven and earth, between God and man, between prayer and life. All is one, and that one is love. And in that sacred awareness you rest, forever held in the embrace of the Father, who was never apart, but always within.
When Jesus said, "Ask, and you shall receive," he was not talking about begging an external God for favors. He was revealing the most profound spiritual law that Joel Goldsmith spent decades helping people understand. This teaching has been misinterpreted for centuries, causing millions to pray ineffectively and wonder why their prayers go unanswered. The secret lies not in the asking itself, but in understanding what you are asking and who is doing the asking. Joel discovered that most people are asking from a consciousness of lack, fear, and separation. They are asking something outside themselves to fix their problems. This is why their prayers feel empty and produce no real change. True asking, as Jesus taught it, is a recognition of what already exists in spiritual reality. You are not begging for something you do not have. You are opening your awareness to receive what has always been present in divine consciousness. This distinction changes everything about how prayer works and why it succeeds or fails. When you grasp this principle completely, your entire relationship with the divine transforms. You stop being a beggar and become a receiver of infinite good that flows naturally when consciousness is properly aligned. Joel Goldsmith taught that the kingdom of God is within you, not somewhere in the distant heavens. This means everything you could ever need or desire already exists in your own consciousness. The asking Jesus spoke of is actually an inner turning, a shift in awareness from the material sense of limitation to the spiritual sense of wholeness. Most people ask from the level of the problem. They focus on what is wrong, what is missing, what hurts. This keeps consciousness locked in the very frequency that created the problem in the first place. Joel showed that effective spiritual work begins by rising above the problem into the consciousness where the solution already exists. Imagine asking while already knowing the answer is yes, not hoping, not wishing, but knowing with absolute certainty. This is the consciousness of true asking. It is not petition, but recognition. It is not begging, but claiming what spiritually belongs to you as a child of the infinite. The moment you understand this shift, you stop praying for things to change and start recognizing the spiritual perfection that is already present. This is when miracles become natural and receiving becomes effortless. Joel discovered through years of spiritual practice that asking is actually a form of listening. When you ask correctly, you are not sending requests outward. You are becoming still enough to hear the answer that divine intelligence is already speaking. The answer precedes the question in spiritual reality. Think of it like tuning a radio. The music is already broadcasting on every frequency. When you ask, you are adjusting your inner dial to receive what is already being transmitted. Most people are asking on the wrong frequency, expecting to hear classical music while tuned to static. This is why Joel emphasized contemplative meditation over petitionary prayer. In the silence, when your human mind becomes quiet, the divine reality can impress itself upon your awareness. You begin to receive not through mental effort, but through spiritual receptivity. The asking becomes an opening rather than a demanding. Your consciousness is the receiving station for infinite intelligence. When it is clear, still, and aligned with spiritual truth, the answers flow naturally. Problems dissolve not because you force change, but because you perceive the reality that was always present beneath the illusion. The reason most asking fails is because people are asking from the separated self, the ego that believes it is cut off from God and must convince a reluctant deity to provide. Joel taught that this consciousness cannot receive because it is founded on the lie of separation. God is not separate from you, withholding good until you ask correctly enough. True asking recognizes your oneness with infinite source. You're not separate from the supply you seek. The intelligence, health, abundance, and love you desire are not outside you waiting to be granted. They are the very nature of the consciousness you are made of when you remember who you truly are. Jesus said the Father knows what you need before you ask. This means the divine is already providing, already answering, already supplying everything necessary for your wholeness. Your role is not to inform God of your problems, but to align your awareness with the divine provision that never stops flowing. When you ask from this consciousness of oneness, you're not asking for something to be created. You're accepting what already is. This is the secret that transforms prayer from struggle into grace, from effort into receiving, from begging into claiming your spiritual inheritance. Helen was a woman who had prayed for financial breakthrough for 3 years with no results. She attended every prayer meeting, repeated affirmations daily, and believed she was doing everything right. Yet her bank account remained empty and opportunities seemed to pass her by. She was exhausted from asking and ready to give up on spiritual principles entirely. When Helen encountered Joel Goldsmith's teachings, everything shifted. She learned she had been asking from lack consciousness, constantly affirming her need and poverty. Every prayer reinforced the very condition she wanted to escape. Joel taught her to stop asking for money and start recognizing the infinite substance that is the true nature of reality. For 2 months, Helen practiced contemplative meditation, not asking for anything but simply resting in the awareness of divine completeness. She stopped tracking her bank balance obsessively. She stopped panicking about bills. She started each day recognizing that infinite intelligence was already providing everything necessary for her well-being. The transformation was gradual, but undeniable. Within 3 months, Helen received an unexpected job offer with triple her previous salary. A forgotten investment matured with surprising returns. Opportunities appeared that had always been there, but she had been too anxious to notice. She learned that asking is not begging, but opening to receive. Marcus had suffered from chronic pain for 7 years. He had prayed desperately for healing, visited countless healers, and tried every spiritual technique he could find. Each time the pain returned, his faith diminished. He began to believe either God did not care, or that he was somehow unworthy of healing. Joel Goldsmith's principle changed Marcus's entire approach. He realized he had been asking God to fix a material body, which kept his consciousness locked in the belief that something was wrong. Joel taught that true healing happens when you rise above the material sense into spiritual reality where perfection is already established. Marcus stopped praying for his pain to go away. Instead, he spent time each day recognizing the spiritual body that knows no disease, age, or limitation. He did not deny the pain when it appeared, but he refused to give it power through constant attention. He practiced turning from the problem to the presence of divine wholeness within. Over 6 months, the pain episodes decreased in frequency and intensity. More importantly, Marcus's fear of the pain dissolved. He discovered an inner peace that remained stable regardless of physical sensations. A year later, the chronic condition had completely resolved. The healing came not from asking for relief, but from recognizing the spiritual perfection that was always his true nature. Victoria had been asking for the right relationship for over a decade. She had created vision boards, done affirmations, and prayed with intensity. Yet every relationship either never materialized or ended in disappointment. She felt cursed and wondered if she was meant to be alone forever. Her prayers felt like they were hitting a ceiling and bouncing back. When Victoria studied Joel's teachings on consciousness, she understood her mistake. She had been asking from loneliness and desperation, which could only attract more experiences of lack. Joel taught that you cannot receive from consciousness what is not already in consciousness. Her awareness was saturated with the belief that she was incomplete without a partner. Victoria began a different practice. Instead of asking for someone to complete her, she spent months recognizing her own spiritual wholeness. She stopped searching desperately and started living fully from her current completeness. She practiced feeling the love she sought, knowing that love is not something you get from another person, but something you are. Within 8 months of this shift, Victoria met Jonathan at a community event she attended simply for joy, not hunting for partners. The relationship unfolded naturally, built on 2 whole people choosing to share rather than 2 incomplete people needing to merge. She learned that asking is not about getting what you lack, but recognizing what you already are. Gregory was a businessman facing bankruptcy. His company was failing, creditors were demanding payment, and his family's security was threatened. He had prayed intensely for a miracle, for God to intervene and save his business. Each day without rescue deepened his panic and sense of abandonment. He felt his prayers were useless. Joel Goldsmith's teaching reached Gregory at his lowest point. He learned that his frantic prayers were actually reinforcing his crisis consciousness. Every desperate ask was an affirmation of disaster. Joel taught him to cease mental struggling and enter the silence where divine intelligence could guide him beyond human reasoning. Gregory practiced contemplative stillness twice daily for 3 months, not asking for solutions but opening to wisdom beyond his limited perspective. He stopped forcing outcomes and started listening for guidance. Gradually, clarity emerged. He saw business restructuring possibilities he had overlooked. He made decisions from peace rather than panic. The business did not save itself overnight. Some painful changes were necessary, but within a year, Gregory had restructured successfully and discovered a more sustainable business model. The transformation came not from asking God to preserve what was failing, but from receiving the wisdom that could create something better. He learned that divine provision often looks different than human expectation. If these transformation stories inspire you, like this video to help others find these teachings, subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith wisdom, and comment which healing journey resonated most with you. Joel Goldsmith taught a complementary practice he called resting in the Word. This technique works alongside proper asking to deepen your receptivity. When you have a question or need, instead of repeatedly asking about it, you select a spiritual truth that addresses the consciousness behind the problem. You rest in that truth like marinating in divine reality. For example, if you are asking about financial supply, you might rest in the word that God is infinite abundance, and you are the expression of that abundance. You do not repeat this mechanically like an affirmation. You sit with it, let it unfold in your awareness. Feel its truth resonating in your consciousness until it becomes real to you. This practice prevents the asking from becoming anxious repetition. Instead of bombarding heaven with requests, you ask once with clarity, then rest in the spiritual truth that addresses the situation. The resting is where the transformation happens. Your consciousness absorbs the truth like soil absorbing rain. Joel discovered that problems persist, not because God is slow to answer, but because consciousness remains unchanged. When you rest in spiritual truth daily, your consciousness gradually shifts from problem awareness to solution awareness. The outer circumstances then reorganize to match your transformed inner state. Another powerful technique Joel taught is the practice of impersonal prayer. Most asking is intensely personal, focused on me and my problems, my needs, my desires. This personal focus actually limits what can be received because it keeps consciousness small and self-centered. Impersonal prayer expands your awareness beyond personal concerns. In impersonal prayer, you recognize spiritual principles that are true for everyone everywhere. You do not ask for your healing, but recognize that healing is the nature of divine reality for all. You do not ask for your supply, but acknowledge that infinite abundance is the truth of existence itself, flowing to all who are open. This practice seems counterintuitive. How can asking for everyone help me specifically? Joel discovered that when you pray impersonally, you rise into universal consciousness where all good is already established. From that elevated awareness, your personal experience automatically reflects the universal truth you have recognized. Try this practice. When you have a need, instead of asking for yourself, spend time recognizing the spiritual truth behind the need as a universal principle. Acknowledge that divine intelligence governs all, supplies all, heals all. As you rest in this impersonal truth, you will find your personal situation transforming without the struggle of focused personal asking. Joel also taught the practice of releasing mental pictures. When you ask, your human mind immediately creates pictures of how the answer should look, when it should arrive, and what form it should take. These mental pictures become barriers that prevent you from receiving what divine intelligence is actually providing, which is often far beyond what your limited mind could imagine. True asking includes releasing your attachment to specific outcomes. You present your need or question to divine consciousness, then step back and remain open to how the answer appears. The universe has infinite ways to provide what you need, but if you are demanding one specific path, you close yourself to all other possibilities. This does not mean you have no preferences or desires. It means you hold your preferences lightly, willing to receive something better than you could conceive. Joel often said that divine supply comes in forms we do not expect through channels we did not anticipate. Your mental pictures limit the infinite to your finite imagination. Practice asking with an open hand rather than a clenched fist. State your need or question clearly, then add silently, "This or something better for the highest good." Release your grip on how it must happen. Trust that intelligence greater than your human reasoning is already arranging the perfect provision. The final complementary technique is what Joel called living by grace. This means shifting from asking God to do things to recognizing that God is already being all, doing all, and providing all. You stop trying to get God to act and start acknowledging the divine action that never ceases. This is the difference between effortful asking and receptive allowing. Living by grace means you go through your day aware that infinite intelligence is governing every situation. You do not have to make everything happen through your human effort. You do your part with wisdom and diligence, but you trust that there is a divine component working through and beyond your efforts to produce results you could not achieve alone. When challenges arise, instead of asking God to fix them, you pause and recognize that divine intelligence is already present in this situation, with wisdom beyond your understanding. You ask not for intervention, but for the awareness to perceive the spiritual reality that already contains the solution. This subtle shift transforms struggle into cooperation with grace. Joel lived this way consistently. He did not frantically ask for guidance before every decision. He lived in a consciousness of oneness with divine intelligence, trusting that he would know what to do when action was required. This is the ultimate fruit of understanding true asking. You rest in continuous communion rather than periodic petition. One of the most common challenges people face when learning this approach to asking is impatience. You practice for a few days or weeks, and when dramatic results do not appear immediately, You conclude the teaching does not work and return to old patterns. This is where most people abandon the practice just before the consciousness shift would have manifested visible results. Joel consistently taught that consciousness transformation takes time. You are not just trying a new technique. You are undoing years or decades of conditioned thinking, fear patterns, and belief in separation. The old consciousness does not dissolve overnight. It requires patient, persistent practice to establish a new foundation of awareness. The key is consistency, without anxiety about timing. Practice your contemplative meditation daily, not because you must see results today, but because you are cultivating spiritual awareness as a way of life. Some people experience rapid transformation. Others need months of practice before visible changes occur. Neither timeline reflects your worthiness or the truth of the principle. Trust the process, even when physical evidence lags behind your practice. The consciousness shift is happening in the invisible realm first. Continue your daily practice of resting in spiritual truth, releasing mental pictures, and recognizing divine presence. The outer results will appear when the inner foundation is sufficiently established. Another significant challenge is the tendency to return to old patterns during crisis. You practice beautifully when life is calm, but the moment serious trouble hits, panic takes over, and you forget everything you learned. You revert to desperate begging, anxious mental struggling, and frantic human effort. This is completely normal and does not mean you have failed. Joel himself experienced this in his early years of practice. During intense difficulty, the temptation to abandon spiritual principles and resort to human panic is almost overwhelming. The key is not to judge yourself harshly when this happens, but to gently return to the practice as soon as you recognize what occurred. Build your spiritual consciousness during peaceful times so it becomes strong enough to sustain you during storms. This is why daily practice matters even when you have no pressing needs. You are establishing an inner foundation that will hold steady when external circumstances become turbulent. The practice during easy times prepares you for difficult times. When you catch yourself reverting to panic and desperate asking, simply pause. Take a breath. Remind yourself of what you know. Return to the silence. Recognize divine presence even in the midst of the crisis. Each time you do this, you strengthen your ability to maintain spiritual consciousness regardless of external conditions. A third challenge is dealing with doubt when you see others experiencing rapid results while your progress seems slower. Comparison becomes a thief of faith. You wonder if something is wrong with you, if you are practicing incorrectly, or if the teaching works for everyone except you. This doubt can undermine your practice completely. Joel addressed this directly in his writings. Every consciousness is unique, carrying different layers of conditioning, different belief patterns, and different levels of spiritual readiness. Some people are prepared by life circumstances to receive truth quickly. Others need more time to dissolve the barriers their experience has created. Neither is better or worse. Your spiritual journey is yours alone. Comparing your progress to another person's experience is meaningless because you are not working with the same consciousness. What matters is whether you are moving forward from where you were, not whether you are matching someone else's pace. Growth is growth regardless of speed. Focus on your own unfolding. Celebrate the small shifts in your awareness, the moments of peace that last longer, the problems that resolve more easily. These are evidence that consciousness is transforming. Trust your unique timing and refuse to let comparison steal your confidence in the process. The fourth major challenge is maintaining practice when results appear to contradict spiritual truth. You practice recognizing health consciousness, and the symptoms worsen. You recognize abundance and lose your job. The human mind interprets this as evidence that spiritual principles do not work. This is a critical point where many abandon the practice. Joel taught that appearances often intensify before they dissolve. This is not because spiritual practice makes things worse, but because your increased awareness sees more clearly what was always there. Additionally, sometimes what appears as worsening is actually a necessary reorganization that precedes breakthrough. The caterpillar must dissolve before becoming a butterfly. This is where faith in spiritual reality over material appearance becomes essential. You must decide whether consciousness or conditions are primary. If consciousness is truly creative, then changing consciousness must eventually change conditions. even when appearances temporarily suggest otherwise. Hold steady through the contradictory evidence. Joel's own healing work involved many cases where symptoms initially intensified during spiritual treatment before complete healing occurred. He learned not to judge by appearances but to remain faithful to spiritual truth, regardless of what the senses reported. This steadfastness is what allows transformation to complete itself. If these challenge-breaking techniques speak to your heart, like to support this content, subscribe for advanced spiritual practices, and comment which obstacle are you ready to transform now. Sophia was an advanced spiritual student who understood Joel's teachings intellectually, but struggled to live them during ordinary daily life. She could reach beautiful states of consciousness during meditation, but returned to fear and struggle the moment she opened her eyes. She asked how to bridge the gap between meditation and daily living. Joel's answer was to practice moment-by-moment awareness. Do not separate your spiritual practice from your daily activities. As you go through routine tasks, washing dishes, driving, working, practice recognizing divine presence in each moment. Ask not just during meditation, but continuously throughout your day by maintaining awareness of spiritual reality. Sophia began practicing what Joel called practicing the presence. Before each activity, she would pause briefly to recognize that divine intelligence was present and active. She stopped dividing her life into sacred meditation time and secular activity time. Everything became spiritual practice. Every moment was an opportunity to ask and receive by being aware. Over many months, the gap between meditation and life gradually closed. Sophia found herself naturally responding from spiritual consciousness during challenges without having to stop and meditate first. The consciousness she touched in silence became her living awareness. This is the advanced stage where asking becomes your natural state of being. Benjamin faced an advanced challenge: how to practice when surrounded by people who do not understand or support spiritual principles. His family mocked his meditation practice. His colleagues considered his beliefs naive. He felt isolated and wondered if he could maintain his practice in an unsupportive environment. Joel taught that spiritual consciousness does not require external validation or support. Your practice is between you and divine reality, not between you and the opinions of others. In fact, maintaining your awareness despite opposition strengthens your consciousness far more than practicing in a supportive bubble. Benjamin learned to practice silently without announcing his beliefs to everyone. He maintained his morning meditation and inner awareness throughout the day without needing others to understand or approve. He discovered that spiritual consciousness does not need to be defended or explained. It simply needs to be lived. Gradually, Benjamin's consistent practice produced visible fruit in his life. His peace during stress, his wisdom in decisions, and his ability to remain centered when others panicked spoke louder than any words. Some family members began asking questions. His example became more effective than any argument could have been. Claire encountered an advanced dilemma. She had been practicing Joel's principles successfully for years when suddenly she experienced a major setback that seemed to contradict everything she had learned. A serious illness appeared despite her consistent spiritual practice. She felt betrayed by principles she had trusted completely. Joel addressed this situation in his advanced teachings. Spiritual practice does not create a magical shield against all human experience. Even spiritually aware people can face challenges that appear to contradict their level of consciousness. The difference is not in avoiding all problems, but in how you move through them. Claire returned to the basics. Instead of asking why this happened to her after faithful practice, she asked how to remain spiritually aware within this situation. She did not pretend the illness was not real. She sought medical help when appropriate, but she refused to let the condition define her identity or destroy her awareness of spiritual wholeness. Through months of patient practice, Claire experienced healing, but more importantly, she discovered a deeper level of consciousness. She learned that spiritual maturity is not about never facing challenges, but about maintaining your awareness of divine presence regardless of circumstances. The illness became her teacher rather than her enemy. Edward was a healer who had helped many people through Joel's principles but struggled when asked to help his own seriously ill child. All the consciousness techniques he had used successfully with others seemed powerless when his beloved daughter was suffering. His desperation to fix the situation blocked his ability to rest in spiritual truth. Joel taught that personal attachment is often the greatest barrier to effective spiritual work. When you are emotionally desperate for a specific outcome, you cannot rest in the openness that allows divine intelligence to work. Edward needed to practice surrendering his daughter into divine care rather than trying to force healing through anxious spiritual effort. This was the hardest practice Edward ever faced. He had to release his grip on demanding that his daughter be healed exactly as he envisioned. He practiced recognizing her spiritual perfection while simultaneously being present to her human experience without denial. He learned to trust divine intelligence more than his own desperate efforts. The daughter's healing unfolded gradually over many months, not in the dramatic way Edward had demanded, but in the perfect way that divine wisdom provided. Edward learned that true asking includes surrendering your loved ones into care greater than your human love, trusting that infinite intelligence loves them even more perfectly than you do. When you truly understand ask, and you shall receive as Jesus and Joel Goldsmith taught it, your entire relationship with life transforms. You stop being a beggar approaching a reluctant deity and become a conscious receiver of infinite good that flows continuously from the source of all being. Prayer becomes communion rather than petition. You discover that asking is not about getting God to change circumstances, but about aligning consciousness with spiritual reality, where all wholeness already exists. Problems do not require divine intervention to fix them. They require spiritual awareness to recognize the perfection that was always present beneath the illusion of limitation. Your daily life becomes a practice of receptivity. You wake each morning aware that divine intelligence is already providing everything necessary for this day. You move through challenges not by frantically asking for rescue, but by recognizing the presence and power already available in every situation. Fear loses its grip because you know you are never separate from infinite source. This does not mean you never face difficulties or experience challenges. It means you face them from a transformed consciousness that knows how to receive divine wisdom, strength, and provision in the midst of any circumstance. You become like a tree planted by streams of water, drawing constantly from a source that never runs dry. The ultimate transformation is discovering that you yourself are the answer to your asking. Not your human personality or limited ego, but the divine consciousness that is your true nature. When Jesus said the kingdom of God is within you, he meant that everything you seek outside yourself is actually the nature of your own being when recognized spiritually. You stop searching for God to give you love when you realize you are made of love itself. You stop asking for abundance when you recognize that infinite substance is the very consciousness you exist within. You stop begging for healing when you understand that spiritual wholeness is your permanent reality regardless of temporary physical appearances. This is what Joel called the mystical experience, the direct awareness that you and the Father are one, not separate beings negotiating terms, but one consciousness expressing itself. From this awareness, asking becomes recognition, receiving becomes natural. Miracles become the normal experience of consciousness aligned with its true nature. You do not reach this awareness through more effort or more intense asking. You reach it through surrendering the belief in separation, releasing the struggle to become what you already are, and resting in the silence where truth reveals itself. This is the pearl of great price that makes all other treasures worthwhile. Living from this transformed consciousness means you approach each day differently. You do not wake up planning how to make things happen through human effort alone. You wake aware that divine intelligence is already at work in your life, guiding, providing, and unfolding good that you could not orchestrate through personal planning. You make decisions from peace rather than anxiety because you trust that you are not alone in navigating life's choices. You ask for guidance not by begging for signs, but by becoming still enough to hear the wisdom that is always speaking. You recognize answers in unexpected moments, through unlikely sources, in ways your human mind would never have anticipated. You relate to others differently. Instead of manipulating or controlling to get your needs met, you trust that divine intelligence is providing through countless channels, many of which you cannot see or predict. You give freely because you know supply flows from infinite source, not from other people's limited resources. Challenges still arise, but you meet them from a foundation of inner security rather than panic. You know that every problem contains its own solution when viewed from spiritual consciousness. You ask not for problems to disappear, but for the awareness to perceive the spiritual reality that transcends every material limitation. The teaching Jesus gave and Joel Goldsmith clarified transforms everything when truly understood. Ask and you shall receive is not a formula for getting what your human personality wants. It is an invitation to recognize your oneness with infinite intelligence and receive the continuous flow of good that is always available to spiritual awareness. Your practice now is not to perfect your asking technique, but to deepen your awareness of the presence that is closer to you than your own breath. You do not need to ask better. You need to receive what has already been given, to recognize what is already present, to accept what has always been yours in spiritual reality. This journey does not end. It deepens infinitely. Each day brings new opportunities to choose spiritual awareness over material sense, to rest in presence rather than struggle in absence, to receive from fullness rather than beg from lack. You are becoming the expression of infinite consciousness that you were always created to be. Joel Goldsmith spent his life sharing this transformative truth. Now it is yours. Practice it daily. Live it consistently. Watch your entire experience of reality transform as your consciousness awakens to the infinite good that asks only to be recognized and received. If your spiritual understanding expanded through these Joel Goldsmith secrets, like this video, subscribe for more transformative teachings, and comment, "I am transformed," to confirm your new path.